Now, every case that we deal with in criminal law will involve a statute, a criminal statute. Statutes are drafted and adopted by legislatures. They are interpreted by judges, and they are enforced by the executive branch. So it is a perfect example of the three branches of government working together as the founders anticipated they would. Uh, uh, Statutes, however, are not always drafted artfully, and we're going to deal with ways to get to the bottom of what a statute actually means and look at some of the difficulties that arise when a statute is inartfully drafted. Aristotle said that towns should be built so as to protect their inhabitants and at the same time make them happy. And that's the purpose of a criminal code, a crimes code. It's the purpose of both protecting the people, the populace of a town, and at the same time making them happy, because there can be no happiness if they do not feel safe. Now, Kaiser Wilhelm is credited with saying that one should never see how laws or sausages are made. The truth is that laws are collective endeavors. They are a result of a lot of pushing and shoving in legislative bodies, a lot of competing interests, and a lot of compromise. As a result, sometimes they're not quite as pretty as we'd like them to be. It is often said that a donkey is really a horse designed by a committee, and that's what we often get out of the legislative process. Now, what do we do when we have a statute that's hard to understand? Well, I have my own way of dealing with it, and you should develop your own as lawyers as you proceed in the practice and through your career here in law school. I read a statute that I'm having trouble understanding 30 times. I read it 10 times as is with the punctuation in place, putting in the appropriate pauses, and I try to get my arms around that, try to figure out what that means. Then I read it 10 times after I've removed the punctuation. And it's sort of a running stream to see if I can find a new place to pause, if that gives it some different meaning, or perhaps not pausing at all might make it more clear. Sometimes an errant comma can throw you off in terms of the meaning and the intent of a statute. And then finally, I put the punctuation back in as written and read it 10 more times. So that's 30 times for me. Now, it may not take you 30 times. You might be able to do it in 3 or 4 times with the punctuation, without the punctuation, and then with the punctuation restored. But for me, there's no magic to this. 30 works. A little time consuming, a little tedious, but it works. Now, let's say you do that and you're still kind of struggling to figure out what this means, because you want to take the statute at first on its face and try to figure out what it means. If that doesn't work, then you can go to a dictionary, a common dictionary, and see if there's any help there in picking out certain terms and phrases that, once defined in a common manner, will give you some better understanding. If that does not work, I then go to Black's Law Dictionary to see if there's some guidance that I can get out of a purposed dictionary that focuses on legal meaning. Then, if that doesn't really get me where I need to be, I look for judicial precedent. Oftentimes, if a statute has been around a while and it wasn't drafted in a reasonably accessible fashion at the beginning, oftentimes the courts will come up with some meaning, and that may have staying power. Then finally, there's legislative history. And every statute passed by a modern legislative body has a legislative history recorded somewhere. You can see the debate on the floor, pick up the intent of the legislators, pick up the nuances that they've discussed and considered when adopting the statute, and that may finally give you some idea of where you're headed. So, criminal statutes should first be understandable. They should not be vague. People have to be able to look to these statutes to then adjust and govern their behavior based upon what they understand the law to prohibit. They need to know what's expected of them. So a statute must first be understandable. Second, it should not delegate too much to police and to judges and juries for their own subjective determinations. And sometimes that happens when a statute is overly broad. Think about how tough it is, what a tough job a police officer has, trying to make a snap decision regarding an ambiguous or vague statute on the street in an instant, in the twinkling of an eye, perhaps. And while we're here at law school, sort of kicking back, trying to figure it out at our own pace. So that gives you some idea of the danger of inartfully drafted statutes. And finally, if a statute is still ambiguous, after all this, after all we've done to understand it, if it is still ambiguous, something called the doctrine of lenity applies. And the doctrine of lenity says that when a statute is ambiguous, it should be decided in favor of the defendant. It should be decided in favor of the individual, because the individual has no fault, no hand in drafting an inartfully drafted piece of legislation.